Okay, we're back. We're live. I'm Jay Fidell here on a given Monday. We're talking about community matters today in the 1 to 2 block. And we have with us Patricia Fae Ho. She is the president of the AAUW, American Association of University Women.
Got that right. Thank you.
Not only is she the president, she's running for another term of presidency of the AAUW. So we're talking today about women. We're talking about women of the world, and we style this show Women of the World Unite. We want to talk not only about what happens domestically about women, we want to talk about globally. Let's start domestically, but I want to reserve plenty of time for the global issues, Patricia. So the AAUW is not just an American organization, right? How far, how wide?
Well, we have 172 members and supporters within the U.S., and we actually do extend internationally because we have among our 900 plus college and university partners, we count a number of international colleges and universities in Australia, Switzerland, the West Indies, India, and a number of others, Ireland, that we are also cultivating. We're a member of the Clinton Global Initiative, in which we get our young students to make commitments to making changes around the world. And for 125 years, we've awarded international fellowships through our Fellowships and Grants program. So we have this abiding interest, not only in equity for women in the U.S., but equity globally, because what affects one group of women really is endemic and spreads throughout. It has a rippling effect. Not only women, women and their families, women and their communities, women in their countries.
You know, somehow in the news, in the stories that excite people over the past couple of years, this issue is more pronounced even than it was before. We heard about rapes on buses in India. We heard about schoolgirls being killed in Pakistan, abducted in Africa. And somehow the recent events in Paris suggest that there are people who don't really care about women very much, nor do they care about free press. And I wanted to explore with you, kind of get a snapshot of how far you've come in the 125 years of your existence as an organization, but where we are now in terms of the success and the challenges that remain. Let's take the U.S. first. What's the snapshot? How is equity doing in these days?
Let me take you to the Shriver Report, A Woman's Nation Pulls Back from the Brink. And AAUW has really supported the issuance of this support put out by Maria Shriver and a number of her colleagues. And according to the Shriver Report, 1/3 of women in America live on the brink of poverty. 2/3 of our American families rely solely or in part on the woman's income, and yet women make up 2/3 of the minimum wage workers. And we know, according to the U.S. Census Bureau, Department of Labor, and our own AAUW research, that women really have not made up that pay gap. On average in the U.S., it's 77 cents to a man's dollar, and women still suffer the same discrimination, the biases. There is indeed a glass ceiling. And even though we hear of women who have extended beyond that, the women CEOs, there are not that many of them. And we look also at our women in Congress. This is the highest number of women participating. It's 19 to 20%. And so in the U.S., there's still a long ways to go, and we just have to keep at it through legislative change, through advocacy and lobbying at the state and national levels.
I want to get the disparity, though. You know, when you talk about, 19 or 20%, or you talk about 77% of the salaries that men earn, when you talk about the fact that women don't do quite as well economically in various places around the country, that, that is, I hate to say doable, but it's not nearly as bad as in the South, in the red states, where they live the life that of nickels and dimes. Remember that book?
Yes.
Rosenzweig, I think
Yes.
was her name, wrote that book. It's a New York Times reporter. She put her money away somewhere in her credit cards and went with no money into the South and did what she could do to survive, a single woman. And it was a terrible time. And she wrote this book about it, and it wasn't that long ago. And I mean, now there's a disparity. If I'm making 77 cents to my counterpart male executive dollar, that's one thing. But if I'm making way less than that and barely surviving in the South, that's another thing.
Yeah, and it really varies by state. The Washington, D.C. area has among the highest. It's 80 plus cents. And the very lowest,
less.
the disparity, right? What we call the wage gap would be less than 20%.
Yeah.
And Wyoming has the hugest gap. And it's availability of jobs for women, the advancement that they can get. I don't know if there are any really large-scale businesses or corporations that women have access to in Wyoming or some of our other states. And the pay gap is also associated with the education gap. Income gap is directly related to the level of education, and we've seen that. It's proven, Department of Labor, U.S. Census Bureau, that the more education you have, whether it's from high school all the way up to a PhD, it's a phenomenal increase in the amount of money that you can make. And so I would dare say that perhaps the level of access to education or educational attainment in some of our states might be a cause of that kind of income gap that we see.
But don't you feel also that some corporations, large corporations, are perpetuating this gap?
Absolutely.
And now that's against the law, isn't it?
Well, you promote from within, and who's to tell you that you have to have quotas? Certainly there was the old affirmative action, and certainly women can bring lawsuit. For example, with our AAUW Legal Advocacy Fund, we support plaintiffs who have a case for discrimination in the workplace. So there are proven cases in which, situations in which there has been disparity, discrimination, biases, not only in academia, but in the workplace.
You're not limited, the AAUW is not limited to academia then?
Oh, absolutely not, no. We are open in membership to those who have at least a 2-year college degree and who believe in the mission of advancing equity for women and girls. And I have to say this through advocacy, education, philanthropy, and research. And that's why the issue of global equity and all the topics and problems and other issues that come under it really are a cause of great concern to us, because we see that these problems that we're facing in the U.S. that confront our women, not only of the aspect of poverty, low educational access in some areas, the high cost of education, sometimes the lack of access to full health care, the biases that they encounter, the wage inequities, the lack of advancement to higher positions. In fact, the lack of advancement to the top government positions, and there are women who have made it, but in most cases not. These are all transferable. It's directly correlating to what happens in other countries.
Well, I want to go to the other countries, but before we leave the U.S., what are your primary initiatives to get the equity, the disparity resolved? I mean, to become more equitable about men, women, jobs, and economic situations. What are the most effective techniques that you're using these days?
Well, number one, as I mentioned, is access to education, because that really is a stepping stone to economic self-sufficiency.
But don't you find, I mean, maybe it's an easy answer here, that if I give a woman precisely the same education as the man, there will still be inequity.
Yeah, absolutely, and that was the result of another one of our studies. I think you've been checking our website. You're good.
Which is
AAUW.org.
Okay.
Yes, right. But so if you have a woman and a man who have graduated from college with exactly the same degree, 1 year out of college, they're working at the same job, the woman will be making 82% of what a male makes. And 10 years after, she's making 66% of what he makes.
That's a serious disparity.
That is serious, and that really has to do with how corporations and businesses view women. Are they still mothers, you know, and these corporations are concerned that these women won't fulfill or cannot balance work-life responsibilities, because in the U.S. and in so many other countries, it's still the women who bear the burden of childcare, housework, doing the job, and doing all of that in the same 24-hour basis.
To do in the family life.
And not only that, it's been proven again and again among women executives that they are disregarded. So if they say something, if they offer an idea at an all company meeting, they are more likely to be told, well, we're not really interested. But if John says something similar, hey, good idea, John, and the man will eventually take the credit. Now, you know, we're not looking at men as our competitors, as the opposition. We indeed have to work all together, because men have wives, mothers, sisters, and men are working with their wives to maintain their family level of self-sufficiency. So why not have equitable pay all around?
Sure. Well, how do you achieve that when you find that there is this disparity in a given area, city, what have you?
Yeah, we really have to be working with our government, with our legislation, with the Fair Pay Act, with the Paycheck Fairness Act, looking at loopholes, not allowing any kind of retaliatory actions, looking for discrimination. But, you know, there is only so much that legislation can do in terms of private enterprise. We really need to be convincing corporations and businesses that indeed the women who are in the leadership roles can make a difference. And it's been proven, according to some surveys, that boards that have women, at least 3% women, really do much better in terms of revenue.
If I gave you a country where everybody believed that women can be and often are stronger, better intellects, better judgment, better leaders, if I gave you that country, this disparity probably wouldn't exist. It's a matter, don't you think it's a matter of some cultural bias that is built deeply into things where people can't seem to escape that?
Yeah, you know, and it's not just the cultural bias, it's the historical aspects, political overtones, the whole history of the gender stereotypes, the gender roles. And I want to tell you that AAUW has sent delegations in terms of doing research, gender study research, and we have been to South Africa, China, Poland, Israel, and Cuba.
We're going to go through those countries one by one after this break. But before the break, it occurred to me, and I have mentioned this to you before, that my two favorite TV shows, by far, which are, interestingly enough, on Sunday nights on cable here in Hawaii. One is Madam Secretary, the story of a Hillary Clinton woman Secretary of State. And the other is a story of a lawyer in a firm, a firm which keeps changing.
Go ahead and say it. It's The Good Wife, right?
The Good Wife. Both are campaigns for women. Both show strong, intellectually strong, morally strong, in every way, strong women who are in business, who are changing the business and political communities of our lives, and who are, the point they make, both of those shows, is that women can often be much stronger than men, and they should be treated as leaders, or they can and should be. Those women should be treated as leaders. It's a case for equity. It's what it is.
Yeah, and
in
bigger
both
pitfalls,
shows.
though.
Bigger risks.
Bigger risks.
But I guess, where do you put that, Patricia? Is that, maybe that's the road home here. That if I have a show like that, which, 50 million, 100 million people watch every Sunday, I'm sending them that message. I'm saying, look, women can be pretty powerful, pretty smart. They can run the country. Watch this. And it's very persuasive to me. Do you think it has an effect? How do you put that in your landscape?
Yeah, and I'm really pleased that those two programs are running along with several others. I remember several that were in previous years that showed women in the strong leadership roles. And I think, that's one good thing that the media and our TV networks are doing, is trying to portray women in that way, but that counterbalances all the stupid, the dumb waitress, or the other roles in which women are cast.
In TV,
so
true.
there's, in TV. And, it's no aspersions on waitressing or whatever, but it's the situations that these women and men are put in that don't portray either gender to the right light.
Yeah, and these shows are relatively new, but they are so refreshing, and I do believe that one of the reasons they are so refreshing is that they attack this issue. And so, this is having an effect.
Yeah, and we need role models.
Yes.
And actually, it's men and women as strong, moral role models.
Yes.
And not just actresses and actors, who are
We need
younger
real ones,
people.
too.
Yeah. I can think of some singers and others who really have been less than ideal in those roles.
Yeah. Let's take a short break, Patricia, and then we're going to come back and talk about the expansion of this whole notion to global application, which I think is so important these days. That's Patricia Fae Ho, president of the AAUW, the American Association for University Women, here on Community Matters. I'm Jay Fidell. We're calling this Women of the World Unite. And in a minute, you'll see more about what I mean. We'll be right back.
Aloha, I'm Kili'i Akina, president of the Grassroot Institute and host on Ehana Kako, a weekly program on the ThinkTech Hawaii broadcast network. Ehana Kako means let's work together. Think of the sad alternative, let's not work together. Here in Hawaii, with all of our diversity and the richness of the people, it's important for us to come together around issues on the basis of what's right and what's good and what's going to serve the common good. And that's what we try to do at Ehana Kako. Every week we interview movers and shakers, people in government, business, and other sectors of society to talk about how to create together a better government, economy, a better world here in Hawaii that can bless the rest of the world. I thank you for your attention to ThinkTech Hawaii, and we look forward to seeing you every Monday, 2 to 3 p.m. on the ThinkTech Hawaii Broadcast Network. We're Ehana Kako, and we wish you well. Aloha.
Okay, we're back. We're live. We're alive here in Community Matters. I'm Jay Fidell. We're talking about women of the world unite, and united, I might add, with Patricia Fae Ho, president of the AAUW. So now we're going to go overseas, and we go courtesy of the AAUW because they have a great presence and consciousness of what's going on overseas. But just as an ordinary fellow who reads the paper and watches the news, I try to watch the best version I can, I can. It seems to me that women in this world of ours are being revealed as having huge problems. And there are civilizations and cultures around the world that beat up on women on a regular basis, that hold them down, that keep them out of school, that keep them at home and reduce their prospects to zero. And it's hard to believe that on one side of the world, you have the AAUW building up women and looking for the correction of disparities. On the other side, it's so miles away where the disparity is so great culturally and physically. And now, for the first time really in our lives, this is being revealed on a regular basis.
Well, and that's thanks to the media coverage, which really is very fine, and we can see firsthand the problems and obstacles that are confronting women around the world. And I do have to add that the U.S. is not a shining beacon of equity either. And so, you know, many of the problems that our women face really are correlated with women globally. I do want to say that the United Nations Commission on the Status of Women has really acknowledged in its annual reports on how women are doing that this kind of progress for empowerment and the equality for women is going very slowly and inconsistently.
Really?
And they cite the growing number of rapes, assaults, kidnapping, the lack of access to education, health care, good paying jobs, Social Security for women. And the U.S. has set aside goals. They have really enumerated what needs to be done. And very broadly, these are for women: freedom from assault and violence and discrimination. They can't do anything if they're constantly victimized. Also, access to education, health care, to Social Security, jobs, ability to care for their families, because so many of these women are providing and are the sole providers for their families, which also are part of their communities. And women need a leading voice within government or their communities or within private enterprise. And so these are the major goals of the United Nations Commission on the Status of Women.
Did you say that the United Nations Commission found that there were an increasing number of incidents of violence?
Absolutely, increasing number. And of course, it could be that these are more reported. AAUW goes to the UN Commission on the Status of Women. We call it UNCSW. And that occurs every March in New York City. And we are one of the participating non-governmental agencies, among many others, who speak to the role of women. But I do want to say that that is also backed up by Amnesty International, because according to that, and I don't know how they got these statistics, but women perform 66% of the world's work. They achieve, they gain.
I hope we all appreciate them for that.
They gain 11% of the world's income and own 1% of the land. And women make up, women are 1 in 3. 1 in 3 women are illiterate around the world. And girls have the highest number of illiterate, lack of education, more so than boys. And so when you look at those statistics, you see the strategies that some terrorist groups are using is cut off that access to education for girls. Keep them at home or keep them covered up. Don't let them learn. Don't let them find out what it is to be able to fend for themselves and provide for themselves, because education in essence saves lives.
And connect that with religion.
Absolutely.
And it's really a shame. I remember reading only a week or two ago that some of the recruits that ISIS was recruiting out of Europe come down and help ISIS were women. And they were being recruited to act as wives for the ISIS fighters. You say, what is this about? And no education, just stay at home and cook and make babies. And reducing them to the lowest possible denominator. And that's what ISIS is about. That's what a caliphate is about. And you say, gee whiz, these women came voluntarily.
And it's fear. It's fear-oriented, because they have no other access.
Yeah.
No other option.
Yeah. So I mean, we have a major problem, and if I may, I'll infer from that increase in the number of these incidents, I'll infer it's getting worse. And did the UN report say anything about why Did Amnesty International say anything about why? Why is it that these numbers are getting worse?
You know, and if we knew exactly why, and of course it is religious-based, it's radical religious-based, and the fact that poverty and the disparity in economic means really has a difference, because if you see who is being recruited, they are people who have no other options. They've been discriminated against, I think certainly in some of our European countries, people who have felt isolated, marginalized, not assimilated into the general mainstream of the population, cut off from decent means of earning a living. I think it really is that. And when you have that disparate income level, then there's that resentment, the hatred, the retaliatory means, and what other means is there except not through intellectual debate, but through fear-based tactics.
So how do you reach the players? You have religious players, you have the men in these societies where this happens, and you have the women, and you have, I guess, the business communities. You have the governments in general. How do you get the word out? This is not acceptable. This is going the wrong direction.
Yeah, I think we have to go in small steps. You know, the microfinancing, the loans to women. I think it actually has to be demonstrated that women do have the power. Once they receive some kind of job training and some limited resources, and they have the initiative and the ideas and the industry, and they can produce at home their little cottage industries and expand and show that they can make a difference economically within their communities, and it can be expanded outward. It's all a rippling effect. It's seeing the positive power of women. And, you know, it's not governments imposing, although that would help to have some kind of legislative access, but it has to come from the groundswell, from within, from the women themselves, and from men who are their allies, men who are their husbands or their fathers
in some places,
or their brothers.
It would be easier. For example, in the bus rape cases that we've seen in India, and that's a cultural point. I mean, it can't happen that often and not be a cultural point. I mean, it's something is cultural there. But you have a relatively educated country, a moral country with the right principles in most cases, and the government is stepping in and trying to do something, prosecuting. So, I mean, I'm optimistic about that. I believe that can be corrected. But you know, in other places, in the land of the caliphates, those places, there's nobody there to protect the women.
Well, you look at the Saudi women who are learning to drive and who are driving, you know, they face tremendous risks. It has to come from the women with some support.
Yeah.
A lot of support.
So they've got to get together, don't you think? I mean, isn't the answer here, and maybe this is something the AAUW is doing, is to make the women work together as a group.
Yeah,
and take affirmative, collective action.
Right, and it's really the power of being together, of collaborating with whoever will work with you, and that's always been our mode, and we have branches, states, and the national organization. So we work at it at all levels. So for example, when we do our advocacy work, we have our branches in our states who are actually lobbying their legislators in their hometowns, in their home states. And we have our national lobby corps, and we have our national lobbyists. And so it's women working together at all levels and finding and convincing business, convincing unions if we have strong unions, convincing people who have that kind of wherewithal, the power, the influence, that women have to be a part of the equation. You know, Hillary Clinton said that the fulfilling role of women is the great unfinished business of the 21st century, for women to reach their potential. Yeah. And they really have, because of the gender biases, discrimination, cultural stereotypes, been held down.
very interesting. I mean, and I would not disagree with that. I think that's the right statement. On the other hand, it occurs to me that we need to ask and answer the question, why should the men care? Why should we collectively, as a species, why should we care?
Well, you want the continuation of the species in good health, right? You need the women, and women who are strong, smart, and bold.
I was thinking that actually, if you take a society where women are equal, it's a better society. It's of course human rights, because human rights includes, gender rights, but beyond that, it's something else too. It means efficiency. It means everything works better. Equality is efficiency. And if you have women, treated as equal to men, then you have a more efficient and therefore a better economic result in that place. So I'm thinking we all do and should care about
Well,
this.
and I have some stories for you there. So if we look at societies where by law, and it's codified, that women have the same rights and everything as men, and I'm really thinking of Cuba, yes, Israel, South Africa, Poland, okay, all of them have, China, they all have the same set of laws for men and women, equal pay, equal access to jobs. However, when we visited each of those countries, let's take Israel, because there is that perception that because women serve in the military and you see women, out there with the men protecting their home country, that women have the same status. We've talked to Supreme Court justices, a retired one, Dahlia Dorner, spoke with us. A woman, retired Supreme Court justice in Israel, said, oh, it's on the books, but the laws are not enforced. And in effect, women do not, in practicality, have that same access to fair pay, good jobs, the higher level echelons of power.
So the issue changes. In some of those really undeveloped countries, it's not even on the books. And you have to begin at a very primitive level to try to teach people how important this is and educate them to get it on the books. Other places, it's on the books, but to some degree it's lip service because it's not being enforced. That's a different problem. And it calls for different action, don't you think?
Well, no, because I think pocketbook, the economy is where it hits. So
Okay.
really,
Okay.
if women can really show that their contribution, their participation, and their leadership makes a difference, that will make the difference. Yes, yes. But, it hasn't been accepted because men in all of those societies have always had the access to the top paying jobs, and they're just used to it. And women have acceded to that too. It's women sometimes, most times, lack the self-confidence. There's a different work ethic, a different way of interacting. Women tend to be more collegial, tend to be listening more, don't put themselves forward enough. And we talked about the double standard. Women in politics, women in the highest echelons of government or private enterprise. Well, she's too aggressive. She's too much like a man. And yet when women show any kind of hesitancy, or they're willing to be collegial, or they're willing to ask for input or opinions, well, she doesn't know what she's doing.
Yeah. So does the mission, does the initiative of AAUW in a country like that change? I mean, it seems to me that the low-hanging fruit is it's on the books, you're not following it, let's see some lawsuits here.
So, right. So legislative change and judicial adherence. So that's what we do very much in the U.S. because we sign on to so many amicus briefs in terms of lawsuits that the Supreme Court is listening to.
By volunteers or paid attorneys representing AAUW?
Both, yes.
And I'm sure a lot of people would volunteer, both men and women would volunteer.
Oh, yes, and we have a whole network through our legal advocacy fund. And our plaintiffs that we support are both men and women who face discrimination in the workplace.
Now, what about these other countries where it's lip service or it's on the books, but it's not getting enforced? And I take it, you listed these countries for me earlier, and there are countries that AAUW visits. I take it you visited
yes,
a number of them?
I've been to Cuba, Israel, and Poland,
Okay.
and we've talked with women leaders there.
Yes.
And interacted with men, and it's always the same story. They will say, it's just like in the U.S., when we say, well, we have problems with pay equity, we have problems with women going through the glass ceiling, we have problems with work-life balance, with women being expected to do the child rearing and the housework and also carrying on their duties. And we find that in all those countries, Poland, the women doctors and scientists that we encountered were very bitter and resentful.
Really?
That they had high education. They were as well qualified as their male counterparts, but they also had no support with child care, that they had to worry about where their children were, either at school or child care or wherever.
The infrastructure wasn't there.
No infrastructure in terms of support. Women in Cuba, same thing.
But you know, it's rising up. This is my observation. It's very limited. You will know much more about it. But coming in this morning, I was listening, as I always do, to Hawaii Public Radio, and there was a black singer from South Africa. You could immediately feel the power in her. You could feel the strength and the commitment, and her thing is women's rights. And she was talking about the movement that she's involved in leading, and her songs are all dedicated to that. And it was a great statement of overcoming exactly what you're talking about in a place where it's on the books but not being enforced. So the media, we've talked about that. We've talked about, popular cultural figures like this woman. I mean, if you go to NPR today, today being the 12th of January, it'll be right there on the website, the name of this woman and her music. But I think that there are leaders, and you guys are leaders. When you go, you connect with the leaders and you network up these, popular movements to bring them together and make them lead.
And I was thinking, since you mentioned media, Nicholas Kristof is a
New York Times,
great advocate for women.
Yeah.
And so there are so many participants and activists in what we call the network of thought and action and advocacy. And that's what it has to be. It's a network. It's a global collaboration. Because what happens in one country or one group of people ripples out, and it affects others.
Yes.
And when you have violence against any group, it really is violence against the global.
Yes. So those schoolgirls in Africa and those kids who were killed for being in school in Pakistan, I mean, that is intolerable.
Well, everybody felt that, right?
Yeah.
It touched everybody because it could have been any group of children or women or people in any country. And we all have that basic humanness. And we all have that basic need, that urge to seek social justice.
Yes, and we means everyone in the world.
Everyone. It's a global community. And we really all work together. We must.
Yeah.
Except for these fringe people who really are counter to the goodwill of everyone else.
But it strikes me, just as you say, that we're now in a different time in the sense that we have incidents that are increasing. But we also have a global village that is becoming more a global village. And we have collectively the power to step in. We have the power. In other words, if there is an offense in Pakistan, and only the people in that neighborhood step in, that's a certain level of control. But if the world steps in and says, wait a minute, you can't do that. We're not going to let you do it. We're going to put pressure on you in a global way. Then you really make the point.
Yeah, and it's the UN stepping in. It's the consensus and the sentiment of other countries. And look what happened in Paris, right? All of these other leaders came in, and there was a show of solidarity. So it touches everyone.
Yeah. it's the new morality, the new global morality,
Yes,
I think.
yes.
And it by itself, I don't know, it's a sort of extension of what was going on before, but somehow we're in a new time where it has greater leverage, greater power. Unfortunately, it usually comes out of something that was bad, that happened that offends the sensibility.
You know, there's new hope and optimism.
Yeah.
And even though, you know, such bad things happen, there is always the need for people to seek higher, and you have to hold on to that seed of hope. And I think the very fact that we have the Nobel Peace Prize winners and other acknowledgments of the good things, the leadership positions, the roles that other people take, no matter what country, I think that lifts us all.
Let me ask you one more question and we'll close, Patricia. So if I'm listening, if I'm thinking about this, and I want to do something about it, I want to become part of that part of the world that cares, that acts, that, you know, organizes initiatives to call for equity, gender equity, and a better life for women and all of us. What do I do? What's my action step?
Well, I think look at your local level, look at your state level. Do what you can in terms of your grassroots. Is there something here, whether it's Hawaii or whatever state or area that you live, is there something you can do for your community to make access to women easier in terms of education, health care, recognition of their leadership skills? Is there something you can do that would make you as an individual more powerful? So I'm thinking of the power of Twitter. And one can certainly tweet if you are well informed and not just, you know, going off into some frivolous messaging, but really tweeting or communicating with others, forming a network of people who together can bring their voices and make it stronger on behalf of some cause. I would say find a cause, find an organization that you are comfortable with, that you can see the direct results of, that would have spreading impact. And of course, you know, think about AAUW, the American Association of University Women.
That's Patricia Fae Ho. She's the president of the AAUW. Here on Community Matters, we've been talking about Women of the World Unite. And when we thought up that name, it didn't seem, you know, to perfectly cover the conversation. But now, having had the conversation, it does perfectly cover the conversation. So let's all unite. Thank you so much, Patricia.
Thank you, Jay.